Wait, you're actually going to tell me a million times on these episodes how great David Lynch is, and then go, I love David Lynch. I love David Lynch, and then you haven't even watched that film. What are we even doing here? What even is this?
It's time for a new arc here on Foreplay, and we thought we were going to be doing Robert Eggers, but then there was the unfortunate and untimely death of David Lynch, so we did mix it up. Not to worry, the Robert Eggers arc is still going to be coming, guys. It's exactly the movies that you think it's going to be, as in The Witch, The Northman, The Lighthouse,
His four
and Nosferatu.
movies,
His 4 movies. It'll come.
The only director arc in Foreplay. We don't even have to make any decisions about it. But thank you. Thanks, Mr. Eggers.
We're catching him early in his career. So I know that Thord and I have seen Nosferatu, so I figured we'd do a little bit of talk about that film
now.
first.
I watched it the other night.
Oh, okay.
Great.
All right.
It's on home streaming. So I'm there with you. Actually, might be ahead of the Northman for me. But obviously we'll talk about it in the arc. But I enjoyed it. I really liked it.
I thought it was amazing. Like, unironically, one of the best films I've ever seen. In fact, one of the things about it is I now get it's one of those films
to look at.
It's one of those films where everyone goes, "You must see it at the cinema." No, I have a home cinema, so I got the full experience.
Correct.
I don't have anyone talking with a phone. I have all the lights out. It's dark. It's late night. It's unbelievable. This is actually a film.
One of these days, I'm going to bring you. We're going to have to compare home cinemas. Like, you'll have to get round to my gaff. Right, I've got vibrating chairs, popcorn machine, 90-inch screen, surround sound shit. So I watched it on that. Like, all the people saying, if you don't see it in the cinema, you don't appreciate it. Fuck you. Your telly is shit.
And here's the thing. I'd heard people saying stupid shit. Like, sometimes people were laughing and think, I couldn't handle that, mate. Like, I thought this film was fucking unbelievable. The atmosphere is some of the best ever. Cinematography might actually be the best of any film I've ever seen. Like, literally, the shadowing, the palette, it's unbelievable. Yeah. You can even see for real that he was inspired by, like, the shadows of the original fucking 1921. Oh, it's mega. It's unbelievable.
Yeah. I mean, in terms of how the movie looks, I mean, like, it hands down one of the best looking films of the last 20, 30 years. I mean,
it's great.
Yeah. So I'll definitely give it that. I did have some issues. Like, I mean, listen, The Lighthouse just hit me in the right place. So The Lighthouse was like that's one of my favorite movies of this century. So it's like it's kind of hard. It was always going to be tough to beat that. But I mean, I just love all of Eggers' movies, and the Witch, as they call it for some reason, The Witch was just great. I mean, I knew immediately after watching that I'd seen something special and from a special director. And then when The Lighthouse came out, I mean, I was. It's one of those where it was like, you watch a cult movie and the cult director says, "I'm doing another cult movie." And the crazy thing people don't know about The Lighthouse is it's loosely based on a true story about 2 Welsh lighthouse keepers. And when I heard he was doing that, I was like, what the fuck? Is this guy like just mining my dreams for like the best movies that I would want to see? And it turns out he is. And Willem Dafoe's in all of them. And he also, more than any other director, he's cemented Pattinson as like a great actor. You know, he's not doing Batman if The Lighthouse doesn't exist. And yeah, it was like, so I'll definitely say this. I think there were definitely some people that were like judging Nosferatu almost by his canon of other movies, and it's like, don't do that, because you're talking, it's like judging fucking Casino by all of Scorsese's films. That was a trap people fell into at that time. You know, people said, oh, Casino's just a Goodfellas reboot, essentially. It's like, no, it isn't that. Judge it in isolation. Judge it against every other film that's released that year, and you'll realize how good Nosferatu is. So I'm obviously sad we're not doing the Eggers arc. I'm glad we are doing it.
It'd be a good excuse to rewatch it in a month or something.
Yeah, exactly. But what a talented guy.
Yeah.
I mean, but also we are about to talk about a guy. While Duncan might not agree, One of the most talented directors of all time. Yeah, that is the beauty. That is the beauty. So, Jurassic Park.
So, David Lynch, as you guys are probably aware, because it was plastered absolutely everywhere on social media, David Lynch died quite suddenly in his late 70s. He's a very interesting, very distinct director. He, in addition to his film oeuvre, he also did Twin Peaks, the very famous television show, which I think was very far ahead of its time for being released in the early 90s. I've been rewatching that as part of this arc, even though we're not doing Twin Peaks or Fire Walk with Me, which is the movie that was based on Twin Peaks. But I would encourage you to watch Twin Peaks. Just bear in mind that season 2 can drag a little bit.
Also, because we have a lot of gamers, right? I mean, like, you have to understand that David Lynch, the movie we're going to be talking about today, Blue Velvet, obviously is like an 80s movie. It came out in 86 in the United States, and it informs a lot of great video games. You know, I mean, obviously, most notably, I would say the Silent Hill series owes a great debt to David Lynch's, oeuvre, if we're using these words now on the show. But there's something incredibly unique about the feeling of his movies. They are simultaneously silly and unsettling. And I think if you ever see a piece of media that throws you off kilter without, if textually it isn't disturbing, but metatextually it feels like it is, it's probably not possible to make that kind of content without David Lynch having been so successful at doing it as he was over the course of his career. And I was devastated. Put it this way, there's some celebrity deaths that hit you, and there's some that you go, all right, well, whatever. It's sad, okay, but the David Lynch death, even at 78, and he'd struggled for a long time with emphysema. I mean, this motherfucker smoked like a chimney, so it's not like it should be a huge surprise. But what really hit me was a profound sadness that he's just irreplaceable. Whether you're like me and you really adore his films, or whether you're like Duncan and you think he's essentially a glorified art house director, almost like a student director in a lot of ways. His films were unique, and he gave so much across to modern contemporary culture, and even got to do things that are inconceivable by modern conceptualization. At a time, put it this way, David Lynch flourished with a show like Twin Peaks and proved you could do avant-garde, crazy TV shows at a time when we didn't have streaming services. There isn't a Severance,
and serialized TV as well in the early 90s, which was a rarity.
Yeah, there isn't a Severance without David Lynch. There is all.
Severance is a banger, by the way. Just going to put that out there.
Severance is a TV show that needed a 10th episode and not a second series. We'll probably talk about that. Bring me into Nerd Legion for that one. I'll be deeply unpopular on that one.
I think Severance is fantastic.
The first series,
very interested. Yeah.
This second series has not been fantastic. But anyway, but impossible without David Lynch. Every crazy, surreal piece of modern cinema David Lynch is the touchstone for all of it. Your favorite director, if you were to ask them, the directors that inspired them, they will all cite David Lynch for good or ill. And so I was just, I don't know, deeply saddened at his passing, but also in a way kind of like, okay, we're now going to talk about David Lynch movies. I'm going to get to talk about David Lynch films with two of my best friends.
Very good.
One of which doesn't really like David Lynch.
That's what makes it interesting. I did think that a good place to start was because it talks about a lot of David Lynch's qualities is an obituary that Kyle MacLachlan wrote in the New York Times, which I found to be quite interesting. And I'm not going to read the whole thing. I would recommend that you look it up. Kyle MacLachlan is the lead actor in this movie. He was the lead actor in the version of Dune that David Lynch did. By the way, we talk about that in Nerd Legion on this channel, if you're curious. It is simultaneously terrible and great. And he was also obviously the lead in Twin Peaks. So I think what he says is a good starting point for our conversation about who David Lynch is as a director. And he says this: though my lifelong friend, collaborator, and mentor David Lynch was as eloquent as anyone I'd ever met, and a brilliant writer, he was not necessarily a word person. I think he just found them insufficient, one-dimensional, not up to the job. It's why he never wanted to explain his work. He wasn't trying to be surly or obtuse. That was never David's way. He loved connecting with people, meeting them where they were, sharing time or space or consciousness. It's just that explaining his art after the fact seemed antithetical to the very point of making it. I sat in interviews and on panels next to him and could see him struggling with questions about what things meant. Often I felt compelled to pick up the baton and talk in circles for a bit until the questioner moved on. David knew that anything he said would be putting his thumb on the scale, and he wanted people to experience his work on their own and take away what they wished. If words were sufficient, why would he have spent the effort and the time and the millions of dollars making it? Wouldn't words have been so much easier? David didn't fully trust words because they pinned the idea in place. They were a one-way channel that didn't allow for the receiver, and he was all about the receiver. This goes on, but I think, this is why I think some people don't like David Lynch, which is that his kind of surrealism could be seen at times as vacuous, without meaning, there for the sake of shock or weirdness without any kind of deeper themes behind it. But at the same time, it also creates a very bizarre and unique experience that does demand conversation one way or another. So it's a double-edged sword in some ways.
Obviously, remember, one of the part of the Lynchian mythology I always love is he could have directed Return of the Jedi. It was right there for him. And I love that clip of him when he was talking about how he went to meet George Lucas.
At least he would have had the Ewoks, right? Hopefully.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. He's got, and George is showing me this thing called a fucking Wookiee, and I feel sick. And it's just so good. If you look that up, by the way, David Lynch meets George Lucas is the clip that it's called. It's one of those. I mean, obviously, we're going to talk about Blue Velvet today. And actually, the films we've picked, we've kind of circumnavigated the very few times he inserted himself into the mainstream. Lynch was a director. He's the closest America's going to get to like a true surrealist in that sense. That there are multiple other directors in other countries that have kind of risen to this cult level of fame. Lynch did do some mainstream films. Elephant Man, obviously, Straight Story is another one. We're not really delving into those, but he was right. Directors really liked him. He was right on the precipice of having all these opportunities, and yet he chose to stay true to himself and made this incredible contribution to cinema with the projects he did end up doing, and ultimately across this arc. We've essentially covered, I would call it the quintessential David Lynch. You either get him or you don't. You're gonna bounce off this arc. If put it this way, if Blue Velvet was too much for you, then by the time we're doing,
do not watch Mulholland Drive.
Yeah, Mulholland Drive is gonna fucking kill you. So, but yeah, I one of the reasons, Duncan, why I was so saddened by his passing is, and whether you love him or hate him, this remains true. He is irreplaceable. There isn't going to be another David Lynch style director. No one's essentially going to be allowed to make the types of movies he made. And I always thought his films, even when they were bad, and I don't love all of his movies, But I thought even when his movies were bad, they were unique, and I can always forgive that. So yeah, I was gutted. I was really. You're never going to see a new David Lynch film or a TV series. And I know he hadn't really done a lot. I haven't even seen the last season of Twin Peaks. I have some reticence about watching it because I thought it might just be a retread. I'm obviously going to watch it now since he's passed. But yeah, I mean, like, I was.
Did you enjoy the film Inland Empire, Richard?
Listen, Inland Empire is a tough one.
Oh, listen, right, okay, well, that's weird. We're starting that word. Okay, keep going.
No, it was a tough one, but equally, if you were to say to me, Duncan, if I was to pry the memory of being like a pretentious student wanker watching films like Eraserhead, and thinking I was really clever and advanced for doing so. Yeah, I wouldn't. I'll take the Inland Empires of this world. I certainly will. And I think ultimately,
I don't think you could even rewatch that film. If we'd have put that on this list, you would have been in hell, mate. You would have been in hell. Because, by the way, I appreciate that you all did just for 20 minutes tell people like me why we don't like or get David Lynch and then psychoanalyze why that is.
Why
Sounds
don't
like a pretty mental thing to do, really. Right? What's funny is, because you never actually bothered to ask, I used to really like David Lynch. Oh, you didn't know that, did you? You never bothered to actually find out what the story was. So, like you, I was in the 90s when I was watching these films. Then when I was a student, I was watching them in the 2000s. And at the time, when you watch a film like this, oftentimes the feeling is like, right, if I don't understand something and there's an artistic veneer to it, like there's something there I don't get. It's like a joke that I know is just like making a cultural reference I don't know. It's above my station. It's got some sort of a literary thing. And you go, oh, yes, of course, Oscar Wilde. But you haven't read Oscar Wilde yet, It's like that feeling.
Right,
so at that time, and especially because, actually this ties into what you're saying, because actually not a lot of films are like this, especially not any film that comes adjacent to the mainstream, it would actually be something like a European art house film that you would only see at like 2 a.m. on Channel 4 in the UK. Like there's never anyone like that became like, fucking, as you say, often Star Wars or something. So the idea there was even a person, like if you don't know back then, guys, if you were to get those magazines where you like paid to be in the movie club, they'd have like Blue Velvet on there and stuff like that. Like it wasn't like it was totally off some shelf you had to go pay. It was a known, like on the fringes of like mainstream culture that these films existed, and this was a popular director. So at the time, the thing I appreciated, this is why my favorite David Lynch film is Lost Highway, is actually some of the surrealism and the fact that you're able to do like exciting things with some of the shots, etc. And obviously, I would say one of his best qualities is, I don't actually think a lot of the plots are very good, but he creates like little almost vignettes within the movie where it'll be one scene. Like in this movie, for example, I could fuck with all the scenes that had the Frank guy in it or the Ben guy in it. That's incredible. That's what I want to see. That's a surrealism. That's like the problem I have is a lot of the other parts of it, a lot of the other parts are just like whatever. And I think if it was a different director with a different name, I think you wouldn't pass the Pepsi test on that one, that Pepsi challenge. You would go, this is fucking nothing. But because it's David Lynch, I think it's the other way around. I think what actually happens is when you watch the film, you're trying to read genius into every little move. And actually, here's my real take on David Lynch. I don't think David Lynch is vacuous at all. I actually think he is one of the most misunderstood people by his own fans, because his own fans think things like they just take their own politics and project it onto it. So what they do, this movie's a perfect example. Get ready, we're about to start the film, just as I explain who David Lynch is. So they think like what David Lynch did was, he's one of those guys who came up in like 60s white picket fence America, and all of his Americana though is about how like American system is corrupt and flawed and evil, and actually like lurking under the surface there aren't actually like nice families that have a nice house. Secretly everyone's like a pedo or a fucking killer or a rapist or a racist or a bigger, whereas I actually don't take that at all. In fact, when I rewatched it, this confirmed my opinion. It's the other way around. David Lynch is actually one of the most straightforward directors ever. It's just that because he is a very weird person, that will just come off very strange to people. I can actually relate to that. People always tell me my whole career in esports, I am a contrarian designing my take to be different to other people. And I always tell people, think of my biography. Why would I have the same take as you? Someone who's 18 now, who's a normal person who started the game recently because you like League of Legends. Like, I'm someone who's a very strange character who spent 20 years going through this whole journey where I'm going to perceive things very differently to you, aren't I? So actually, it's totally reasonable. My take would be quite different to most people's, because there are a lot of people like me. So I actually think, for example, all the Americana stuff is incredibly earnest. I actually think that aspect isn't that's fake, and then this is like the real thing. I think actually, if anything, the Americana I can see is almost a love letter to America. All of that aspect I see as like very wholesome. And I even think that's why not only is that infused in all his films, but then the darker element I see actually as like an acknowledgement there is darkness in the world. And if anything, by the way, think of this film. Isn't the whole thing like this film has a happy ending, for fuck's sake, in the sense that they don't just get killed by the frat guy and beaten to death? This isn't that like it's all evil and dark. Everyone be a goth and be weird.
Chinatown. This could have the Chinatown ending.
This is basically one of the reasons justifying why you have to like protect the Americana and the white picket fence and get the bad guys, and we can't just let them fucking secretly go around do that. I actually find it very earnest in that sense. So, by the way, I don't dislike this film. I just don't think it's like a fucking stone cold classic or something. And I think certain parts of it, like the first 45 minutes, are a drag. They're just doing a thing where they're setting it up. Now, again, when I hadn't seen many films, whatever, I'm on the journey. Like, where's this going? I've heard it's fucking mad. I've already seen the fucking cover, haven't I? But once they get to all the surrealistic scenes, like those could even be scenes from Twin Peaks. Those scenes are really interesting. It's just, like, for example, I've told you, like, Straight Story is probably my least favorite one of his films. That's just a whatever to me. It doesn't have any of the surrealism in it. I actually want the sort of, like, crazier elements in some. But the problem I have is, then he goes to the point. This is fine, by the way. I'm not the person. I don't do that thing, by the way. I'll give you an example. I saw you reference on one of your Patreon Q&As that you like the electronic artist from Brazil called Amon Tobin, right? Now, what's funny is I was massively into his music from Ninja Tune for like the first 4 albums. Then I will never listen to another one of his albums ever again, because what he did for me was he pushed the boundaries so much that his whole thing became to push the boundaries. So he got to a point where it was still melodic and had electronic elements. It was just really good and interesting sounds. Like, for example, what he would do, Monty, is instead of doing a drum and bass song with like a traditional arm and break drum, he would actually take like a different sound, like for real, like a car alarm or something, and make that like the beat behind it. And so that was really interesting. But then eventually, unironically, he even started to do art exhibitions. This became his whole thing, that everything had to be like alien, totally, and it went too far. And eventually I just didn't have any interest. And for me, it lost the melody. It became like, I won't say the names of the programs, but basically like the technical software that he used to do this, he sort of like went a bit wanky on going on all the details. And wherever he was going, that's okay. I don't sit around posting on Amon Tobin, what's going on? Where's the old shit? I just listen to the old albums and get on with my life. It's okay. He took a different path to me. Kept going down this path over here. So similarly, if you go right up to about, for me, the breaking point is Mulholland Drive. Mulholland Drive, because I really like Gloss Highway, I remember even thinking, like, if this is good, it's all right. That movie already tips over into being slightly shit. And Inland Empire, I wouldn't literally make people in Guantanamo Bay who had killed my family watch that film. That would be inhuman. I don't think anyone. I literally don't believe any of you in the chat like that film. I do not believe it. I just don't.
I've never seen it, so I'm.
Are you having a fucking laugh that you're actually going to tell me a million times on these episodes how great David Lynch is, and then go, I love David Lynch. I love David Lynch, and then you haven't even watched that film. What are we even doing here? What even is this? What even is this? That's like going, I can't even handle that. What even is that take?
I've watched it exactly once.
You're the guy who goes, Leslie Hawkins, but you only know I am the one and only. That's you. That's you, mate. You've done yourself there.
I've watched it exactly once. And I will say,
Foreign has watched all of David Lynch's oeuvre and therefore doesn't think he's amazing. And everyone who hasn't seen it or hasn't seen it in a while goes, I think why psychologically you don't get the film and it doesn't resonate with you and your artistic.
Listen, I didn't say anything about your takes.
Yeah, neither of us said you don't get it, Duncan.
Didn't say it at all.
But I will say that like Inland Empire, unfortunately, being his last movie, it's like we maybe should have we maybe should have included it just to. You know, because it's the scales of Anubis.
I think it would piss people off. That's the problem. I think it would piss people off.
Basically, Blue Velvet is the feather against the Inland Empire heart or something. You know what I mean? It's how it should
I put it this way. Even though I joked like only wanted the Frank scenes, that's like if the whole movie was just only Frank scenes and more. Like some of that's like they barely has a plot in that film. It's crazy. And I'll just throw this out there. You are right though. The reason why you will never have a director like this, and this is why I always tell people, don't ever try and scare away directors when they stop doing films you don't like. Same with David Cronenberg. Nobody allows you to fund those movies anymore. If you don't know, in the modern day, Monty, people like Cronenberg and Lynch, and at the end, Lynch couldn't get any funding. They only get funding because someone's a fan of their 80s films and 90s films. They don't really get it anymore because the movie will make money. You can't put a film like these on in an Inland Empire and make loads of money. So unfortunately, eventually, you're sort of living off name value, and it becomes like those 70s and 80s giant rock bands where they can still put an album out. So people will always listen. But you can't be the next Rolling Stones. That doesn't exist like that. There's no market for that, unfortunately. No one's trying to find those people. So even if there was someone like this, funnily enough, actually, someone like an Eggers might himself be some sort of case study in how do you do well in really unique style and have movie success, because he's one of those people like a Nolan who's walking some bizarre life.
You're right there. There might be some foreshadowing in this arc about like what future great directors like Eggers might run into. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, I think so.
Monty, we haven't done this for ages on this show, but I think for this one, because it's actually deceptively straightforward, I think you should do the casual, the casual synopsis.
Before I do that, I do want to respond because there's a lot there, but especially the Americana take. I do find it, because this is going to be something that repeatedly comes up in David Lynch's work.
Absolutely nailed on with that, by the way. His love of Americana is absolutely earnest. And anybody that thinks that like it's coming from a place of him like not loving America, that's not who David Lynch is. He loves all of this stuff. He loves the small towns. He loves the idea. He loves the 50s, the diners, the pies and the coffee. He loves all that.
In Los Angeles, in the Valley in Burbank, there's a very old diner called Bob's Big Boy, which is a diner I've been to on several occasions. Everybody in LA has been to this fucking diner, and very famous. It is very cheesy. It is very 1950s. And famously, this is where David Lynch would go to like have coffee, a milkshake in the afternoon, smoke a bunch of cigarettes, and write all his ideas on napkins, right? And so he was actively engaging in these things. But as an American who does enjoy the kind of cheesy Americana veneer, I think that it does come off as very genuine, and it's not trying to exist, as you say, Thorin, in some sort of it exists in contrast to some of this.
It's not
ironic,
right?
It's not supposed to be there to be like, look at all these silly Puritans, ha ha ha. There's a real genuine love for the cheesiness of it, and for frankly, the pleasantness of it. Like there's something very comforting about the Americana. And it is, sometimes, so this movie takes place in North Carolina. Twin Peaks takes place in Washington State. And so you're dealing with kind of opposite sides of the country, but sort of a similar rural feel. And it really is something that is actively celebrated. The idea of the high school dream, Kyle MacLachlan is dating Laura Dern, who's still literally in high school in this film. And so that contrast is very interesting. And I think that he is showing what America is actually like without making overt judgmental commentaries on either side of it. And I think that's what's really fun about David Lynch's work, is the dichotomy really works, and it feels good and without judgment, and that's
I don't know if you've ever seen
compelling.
This, I believe he has when interviewed. I'm certain I saw him say this once, because again, I was actually a fan until about 10, 15 years when I rewatched some of the films as an older person.
Inland Empire will test your faith, sure.
I'm pretty, and also Razorhead. They're a hell of a bookend right there. So I would say this, right? I remember, I'm almost certain he did an interview where actually, like I just said, he actually sort of shut down his fanboys. He just sort of, his whole sort of thing was like, no, a cigar is just a cigar in my films. Like there isn't a secret meaning I put in there. Like I actually just meant it like for, like whatever, well, obviously his own reasons, you can speculate. But as far as I know, he didn't like layer all these extra things in. Like you can read that, of course, it's up to you. You can take that out of it. But I never got that vibe.
Well, and also, I mean, because I've been watching Twin Peaks, this is very fresh in my memory, but a lot of the scenes with Dale Cooper in Twin Peaks are him defending the people in the rural town of Twin Peaks against the big city interlopers. And it doesn't come across like he's a man who's coming from Washington, from the FBI, Washington, D.C., not Washington State. I know it's confusing. Anyway, he's the man coming from Washington, D.C., and yet he has all these other accomplices that are entering and leaving the town, and they are if anything, they are the caricatures of, the people being critical of those who live in these rural environments or those that have these kind of values. So it's often, I would say, the other way. Anyway,
a quintessential component of everything Lynchian is ultimately, with the exception of Dune, and as Duncan says, we just forget about Inland Empire, but almost every other movie, and Twin Peaks, the TV series, is that there is this preserved component of genuine Americana that is beset upon by some corrupting component that comes into it, and maybe has always existed there, but you weren't cognizant of. And whether the movie has a happy ending or a sad ending, and actually, if you look at his films, they're not saccharine, but most of his movies have a happy ending in a Lynchian context.
One of the reasons I picked Wild at Heart is I actually think it's got like quite a wholesome story to that as well. There's clearly like a real.
Absolutely.
By the way, even Frank's fucking monologues are sort of like a fucking dark love letter to romance itself.
Sad. They're sad. Frank Booth.
No, absolutely. He's not like heroic, edgy, like evil. No, fucking, he's pathetic.
I sent you a love letter, you fuck.
Yeah.
It's a bullet. It's a bullet. It'll kill you, motherfucker. Yeah, it's perfect.
You know what a love letter is? It's a bullet from a fucking gun, fucker. If you receive a love letter from me, you're fucked forever. You understand, fuck? I'll send you straight to hell, fucker.
But like, what Lynch was, I think what a lot of his movies are essentially saying is like, there is an American value that is worth preserving and fighting for against this corrupting influence. And in that sense, the Americana is incredibly earnest. I mean, listen, this is one of the movies I had to study at university. I had to listen to pretentious student wankers like me. But back then, talk about this shit when I was less of a pretentious student wanker when I was a pretentious student wanker, if that makes sense. And I used to have to listen to them, and they'd be talking about, well, obviously he's chosen the white picket fences to represent Americana, the ideal, but America, the ideal, doesn't exist. And that's proven by the opening scene where the person has a stroke immediately, where it's like, fuck up. Like, no, what David Lynch, basically, the opening scene of this film is a mission statement. It essentially says, this is what I'm going to do in this film. And it's like, I'm going to present to you a story within this setting, but we're not going to be looking at the superficiality of the setting. We're going to get into the soil with the insects and the grubs and the beetles and this dark, So that's what, like, there is, the word for Lynch is earnest. Anyone who thinks he's being surreal for its sake, anyone who thinks he doesn't love America, the idea of 1950s America, you don't get Lynch. Like, it's as simple as that. He loved growing up in America in the time he did, and all of those parts of classic Americana he inserts. But it's like in Twin Peaks. There's no reason FBI agent Dale Cooper has to travel all the way to Twin Peaks to get his favorite cup of coffee and slice of pie. There's no reason to put that in, but that is Lynch yearning for something that didn't exist in the late 90s.
By the way, I'll give you the person who I totally get why aesthetically people would make the mistake of like banding them together. They're describing David Lynch like he is John Waters. John Waters is taking Americana, and it's like, that's ironic and perverted. I'm going to be subversive with the
He's a transgressive director.
Yeah,
exactly.
I don't see any of that in David Lynch's work personally.
No.
I don't even know how you could possibly think that, frankly. Like, that's what's so, because he's very, I don't feel that he's very subtle about his love of Americana. It's kind of just there for you to take in. And there's not really any kind of negative commentary around it. So I find it very odd that people have that takeaway. But
in fact, just before you do the synopsis, I'll just add one more thing. I always think his stories, I mean, by the way, I know Duncan didn't like the film, the straight story, but I think that, by the way, is probably his most earnest love letter to Americans. as a people. But I always took it from a lot of his work that, look, we could have a paradise in this country if it wasn't for these elements that creep in. I think he feels a profound sadness that something like, you know, the fucking murder of Laura Palmer can happen in a town like Twin Peaks. I think he's not doing it to like say something profound. I think it's almost like, wouldn't Twin Peaks be fucking swell if we just weren't murdering teenagers? Sure. Like, I genuinely think there's that component to it. And that, again, it's one of the reasons why I just fucking love this guy. Like, it's crazy to think that there is a dude who, he is very misunderstood. Like, he is the go-to surrealist. Like, he's like a fucking, I don't know, a fucking Dada-esque film director when he isn't. It's just that there are these surreal elements that he uses for ultimately visual storytelling. But if you strip all that away and you simply look at the story elements, these are stories that make sense. I mean, like, this film we are going to get to talking about after like 30 minutes waxing lyrical about him as a director. You know, this is a very straightforward story. Ultimately, it's just one thing I will say is I don't think David Lynch necessarily had the exposure to the things he was lamenting. I don't think he understood crime. I don't think he understood violence. You know, in a conventional sense, like maybe we would. I don't think he was ever exposed to it, and so when he writes it, it does feel a little bit off kilter. And that's another aspect of it where it's like, no, he's being earnest. Like, you know, in the original script for this movie, Frank Booth was huffing helium, and he thought that was disturbing. And then, like, when he met with Dennis Hopper was going, well, no one would do that. Like, it would probably be nitrous. And he's going, what's that? You know, I don't know what that is. And so that's what I love about it. Like, David Lynch, for all
the violence feels almost performative at times.
Yeah.
Because it's
silly, a lot of it. It is silly. But what I will say when we get to it, the 40-minute or whatever it is, wow, was it long? The bizarre sexual assault scene in the middle of it, which then becomes a reverse sexual assault scene, I still found it disturbing. I still found it horrifying in a way. I didn't find it funny or comical like I remember it. Because, you know, look, when I was 20 years old, I used to walk into a room and go, let's fuck! You know, just scream that at the top of my voice. I'll fuck anything that moves. All right, Richard's here, you know, he's doing his Frank Booth impression, you know?
Let's fuck! I'll fuck anything that moves!
And it was just like, I remember this movie being like a lot funnier than it actually is. Like, this was as a man, instead of just a boy pretending to be a man, this was like actually really disturbing. So anyway, yeah, David Lynch loved America. we'll put a pin in that. And now it's time for the Monty synopsis, the werewolf break of this podcast that we'd forgotten.
Also, shout out to the comments after our long break where everybody said, thank God the werewolf break is over on our YouTube comments. That was very
My
funny.
proudest achievement is actually introducing The Beast Must Die to like 10,000 people and the werewolf break becoming mainstream. Like, when I do shuffle off this mortal coil, like, my last thought will be like, at least you did that.
Well, they're not going to know what it means. I actually did say the phrase "the werewolf break" in my Reckless video, which is going to have like 200k hits, mate. So we're preaching this word. They're not going to know what it means. They have to Google that. You know?
Calvin Lockhart is looking down on all of us right now, loving what we did. So God bless.
That's
I'm
right.
Milton Subotsky.
We'll tell people in your obituary that you're coming back. It's merely a werewolf break.
Oh wow! Imagine that. That'd be cool, actually, because we've had esports weddings. Am I going to be the first esports funeral that gets streamed, and you're going to get up and you're going to have a collar on and be like, Richard isn't dead, he's merely having a werewolf. Right? That'd be kind of cool. Anyway, tell us the plot of this fantastic
film. So Kyle MacLachlan, whose name is Jeffrey Beaumont, he's a college student, and because back in the day, college students, of course, were fewer in number and then dated high school seniors. But basically, his father has some sort of medical episode, almost dies. He has to come home and take care of his family's very wholesome hardware store in rural North Carolina, in a town called Lumberton. Lumberton, where they
even worse.
cut lumber. I know, very, very shocking. The primary industry. But anyway,
Twin Peaks.
Yeah, it's very, very Twin Peaks, very similar. I mean,
so much DNA of this movie.
Yeah, it's crazy. So anyway, he comes back, and the daughter of the police detective is the one he ends up involved with. He finds an ear in a field, and that ear leads him through Sandy, who's Laura Dern, to tell him something that her father overheard, which is that it involved this jazz singer named Dorothy Valens, who plays at a roadhouse. I mean, it's just like the peak of America right here, who sings at a roadhouse.
Curtains.
Who sings at a roadhouse. And so he starts investigating it on his own, and he decides to basically pose as an exterminator to get inside her apartment and steals her keys. He then returns later on, and while hiding in a closet, ends up in a very uncomfortable situation where she finds him and then she tries to sexually assault him after he saw her almost naked. And then Frank Booth, a career criminal, organized crime lord, shows up and has a very uncomfortable and lengthy very violent sexual assault scene where he rapes Dorothy, and it, kind of shocking, especially for the mid 80s when this was released, and finds out that Frank has Dorothy's husband and son imprisoned so that he can basically rape her as much as he wants. So everything is really fucked up at this point in time. He continues to Jeffrey, Kyle MacLachlan, continues to have sex with Dorothy while seeing Sandy, the high school girl, at the same time, which is kind of that 1 foot in the pure Americana world and 1 foot in the fucked up underworld. That
kind of like Virgin Madonna whore complex is obviously on display,
Oh yeah, classic stuff. Yeah.
So basically, then he gets caught in Dorothy's apartment on one of their trysts. While Frank shows up, he then gets kidnapped and taken to another gangster named Ben, who is holding Dorothy's husband and her son hostage. And then they drive around with him at very high speeds. And then he tries to stand up for Dorothy, who's also with them. And then they beat the shit out of him. And then he finds out that one of the gangsters is the detective father of his girlfriend's partner. So the corruption is in the police department. And basically they have been helping, the police have been helping the drug dealers. And then there is kind of a sting operation that occurs where they end up taking all the drugs from a police raid, and Dorothy gets her son back, but her husband is killed, and Jeffrey gets the forgiveness of Sandy for inexplicable reasons. So they continue their relationship, and everything kind of ends okay in the end.
Another happy ending. A classic Lynchian happy ending.
Because you think, by the way, I mentioned this earlier, but you think the ending is going to be Chinatown, where it's just like, You know, the gangsters get away with it.
Bad.
Dorothy never gets her husband and child back. She continues to be raped. The cops are corrupt. End of story. So it's the ending like builds up to that scene with like John Huston in Chinatown, and then it just ends up okay. And you're like, oh, well, all right, then.
That's also an effective thing about the film, though. Like when first of all, they clearly make you Cal MacLachlan a lot of the time. You're in the cupboard with him. You're peeking out. You're the voyeur watching it. Later on, when you're in the car and you've been to that gangster's house, you think there's no way you get out of this. You're just going to end up fucking murdered or butchered or something. Like when he's getting beaten up outside, he's saying that thing about love is a bullet or whatever. Like you don't think there's any good way out of that. There's no way. Like it looks really, really dark, but then bizarrely he pulls a turn at the end and sort of ends on like something approaching a happy ending. Still not a happy ending, is it? Like that woman's fucking distraught, etc. But that's something approaching a normal movie ending.
Yeah, I mean, look, it's what I love about the film. One of the things that I do love about the film is, obviously, this is not Lynch's first movie. It feels like his calling card. Like when you talk about Lynchian history and you talk about his filmography and everything he did, if you were to talk to a novice, people would go, oh yeah, and of course he did Eraserhead, and then he did Blue Velvet, and there's no, he'd already been in the mainstream. He'd already had the Dune flop by this point. He'd done The Elephant Man by this point. The key component about this was David Lynch did Eraserhead. Eraserhead was like the movie that launched a fucking 1,000 posters, essentially. It was the on the road of art house movies. And by the way, I still think it holds up. I know, again, Duncan, you alluded to the fact you're not a fan. I actually really think Eraserhead is a very earnest telling of anxiety about what it is to become a man and a father and a husband and all of that other stuff. And I think it hits people different at different points in their lives, and maybe there is an element of superficiality to it, but I defy anyone to not be disturbed by the fucking chicken baby if they have a kid. I mean, it's like I still think it's really fucked up in a way that can only hit certain people at it hits you in the right spot, I think. But certainly he done The Elephant Man. This is a mainstream movie. Dune is the ultimate mainstream flop. It's the ultimate unfilmable book. Like, this is how Hollywood thinks. Let's take an unfilmable book and let's give it to a director who likes to do surreal stuff. This will work. The book's surreal, which it isn't, and he's a surrealist, so this will work. No, unfortunately, we were robbed of Hodorowski in his interpretation.
But rip the 10-hour Dune.
Right, would have loved it, actually. There's no way. But by the way, after we've seen the Villeneuve version, there's no way. There's no way it could have been worse. So I'm about that. But anyway, 86. This is when Lynch is just like, you know what? I just want to make my shit. I'm never doing that again. And he didn't. With maybe the exception of The Straight Story. But if you look at who funded his movies after Dune, it's not like he was toxic. It was just like he wanted to just make the movies he wanted to make. So a lot of people mistake that Blue Velvet is like some early calling card because it's quintessential Lynch. No, it isn't. It's not his calling card. He'd already been out there. It was just that the mainstream were like, you know what, David? If we could just dial down the Lynch, it was just like this stupid focus group bullshit. And then he got to make the movies he wanted to make. And so what I love about this film is, first of all, the opening. The bit before the opening scene, the actual credits, where it's just the Blue Velvet with the Angelo Badalamenti music, and it's just a shimmering, moving Blue Velvet. Very Hitchcockian, reminded me a lot of Vertigo, watching it back, that it was setting you up for what is, by the way, a noir movie, so how could I not love this film? And then the opening scene, as I said, right, this will probably be where our editor does this brilliantly, so looking forward to it. But basically, it's just it's everything you associate with Americana: white picket fences, beautiful flowers, wonderfully composed and shot, almost oversaturated, hyper reality in a way. A slow hand waving. Hey, a fire truck without a siren, crucially, going down the road. Hey, no emergency. We got time to wave at each other. We're neighborly here. You know, this is America, right? And then as that's happening, you tunnel in. There's an old dude. He's just watering his garden. You know, like, why wouldn't he be watering his garden? Like, it's his pride and joy. It's essentially the projection of you into the neighborhood, how much you care about your garden, right? And your white picket fence, making sure it's got that fresh lick of paint on it. And then as he's doing it, while Blue Velvet is playing the song, he's
gone was the glow of
he just strokes out while he's trying to pull a fucking hose away because it gets caught on like a thorn bush or
By
something.
the way, that even is a bit unclear to me. I had to rewatch that and pull it back. I kept thinking, were they trying to imply something was like going to ping off and like shot into his neck? But bizarrely, they show that, but then it is just supposed to be that he just has like a stroke or something. Like you say, that's like an embolism or some shit, right?
I remember first time I watched this movie, I watched it with one of my good friends that, you know, sadly drifted apart. He was a good friend at university, and he always told me that like it was a bee. It stung him and he had anaphylactic shock, and I was like, that don't make sense. And obviously I was like, wouldn't David Lynch have just shown a bee? wouldn't he even,
especially because he shows all the other bugs in this
exactly
movie.
Right. There's ants, there's beetles, but no, it's not. He just has an embolism.
It's not a heart attack or whatever. Yeah, it's whatever.
Yeah. It's a stroke, something like that. You know, it's irrelevant, really. The point is that this entire opening scene is telling you what the movie is going to be. It's like, look, this is David Lynch saying to you, and this is what I mean about him being a visual storyteller. It's set here. It is set in this beautiful, idealized version of America where everyone gets along and there are no problems on the surface. We're gonna, but there's gonna be this interruption to the norm, to what happens. That's represented by the stroking out. And by the way, that ultimately does serve a storytelling purpose, because would Kyle MacLachlan's character have even discovered the year if he wasn't having a whimsical walk trying to come to terms with his father, who we find out is the guy having the stroke in the opening scene? But also, it like the way it tunnels down into the grass and it moves through the grass and it gets into the soil, and you can hear, because David Lynch loves sound. You hear this. I don't know if this is going to come through. You hear this scrapey. Excellent. You hear this scrapey of the Beatles, and they're moving through. And it just tells you, like, we're going to look at the underbelly of this town in the same way our main character is. And in a lot of ways, you know, Jeffrey, but also like just Kyle MacLachlan in general, in a lot of David Lynch content, he's the pure essence of the naive, and he's our insert. Like we're going on this journey. He's us. He's our audience insert. Quite literally, when he's, you know, there's two scenes where he's staring out of a closet in the same way we are we're voyeurs to this story. And that's what I love about it. It's like people have overanalyzed that opening scene to death. It's like a film student staple, but it couldn't be simpler. David Lynch is just simply telling you, this is what's going to happen in this movie. Like, you're either in or you're out. That's it.
Well,
it
goes.
By the way, the thing that you're saying about the bugs is where I think people start that whole, that's supposed to represent the darkness is coming through.
I
don't see that. That is a technique people will use in films, but I don't see that personally. No, I just saw that as he just thought that. By the way, that Summer Rae's Head shit, you thought that was just a cool shot of some bugs, I reckon, and put some weird crinkly sound with it to make it weird, you know?
Sure. I definitely think it's a statement about this is the part I'm going to show you. But like, I don't think it's like, oh, the Beatles represent. You know, I don't think it's that. I think it's just like, yeah. It's just like, this is America, And no matter where you go in America, there is this aspect to it. And that's what we're ultimately going to focus on, because the story in and of itself is kind of shocking, you know? Kidnapping
literally
someone's husband so you can rape their wife repeatedly is mental.
It mirrors the actual sequence of events in the movie, which is, here's the shiny veneer and the neatly trimmed lawn. Here is the act of God, okay, which is him finding the ear randomly, right? The act of God is
the stroke. I was going to say.
No, I was saying the act of God is the stroke, just like the act of God is finding the ear. And then from that point, it triggers kind of the descent into the underworld, right?
Yeah.
But I think it's very straightforward.
Obviously, the first episode of Foreplay was the thing. And as Monty pointed out in that episode, obviously the opening scene where you get to know the characters is essentially just a pared down synopsis of the whole movie. You know, it's cheating bitch blowing up the machine rather than losing a game of chess. You know, and it's the same in this film. It's like the opening scene just tells you this is what we're gonna do. Like you either come along for this ride, or like you're not gonna hack this. And I do think, like, Duncan's right. I had to listen to, like, put it this way, David Lynch has said multiple times, and you can't take David Lynch at face value. He's a little bit tricksy in a lot of his interviews. But David Lynch has said multiple times when he was writing this film, he just had an idea about a severed ear. Like, what would it be like to find a severed ear? And yet, when you're in a film studies class, everyone's going, well, of course, David Lynch chose the ear because the ear is one of the sensory organs. And no. He just thought it would be funny to find an ear. That's it. Like, I mean, you know, there's no way he's not being earnest about that. There's no way it's like some sort of metatextual, insane point. It's just like, what else could you cut off a person and discard other than maybe a finger or a toe? Shout out to Big Lebowski. Definitely took its cues from this. What else could you find? Right? And he chose an ear because it's kind of weird and interesting. And by the way, they made up multiple different ears. Wasn't even like a whole ear initially. It was a lobe in some, you know, and then Lynch went, I actually like the full ear. So it's not like there's some insane thing that people focus on. It's not saying sometimes an ear is just an ear, I guess, to get Freudian. But yeah, it's like I love the opening sequence of this film. I mean, other than the fact I'm supposed to believe MacLachlan is like 20 or something.
22, I think, something like
20.
that.
Yeah, he's like come back just in time to work from college. I don't know. I mean, also, it was just nice to see Laura Dern not being Admiral Gender Studies from Star Wars.
By the way, another thing, actually, the ones that I do like of David Lynch's films are usually the ones where I like the actors in them. Like, they actually have people giving a good performance. Like, obviously, Dennis Hopper's amazing in this fucking film. Dean Stockwell's pretty good. There's some pretty good performances. The thing is, though, I also thought one interesting dynamic, and this is, if you notice, I don't tend to do that. Like, it symbolizes that I don't even interpret things on that level. By the way, I think it's valid, but it's just another model to me. Like, to me, when you do that, I think the best example ever of this is that famous series, if people don't know, that Jordan Peterson did on the Bible, right? If you ever watch it, like, I don't think most of that stuff is in the Bible. I think that's just, he has a massive knowledge of mythology and other things, and he's relating his knowledge base to the thing. So, by the way, if you're interested in him, it's going to be really interesting. But he might be thinking, what he's really trying to draw out these things. I don't know that that's there, mate. Look, it's interesting because you're interesting in the same way as, I'll give you a famous example. The critic Pauline Kael, if you know her, wasn't just someone going 2 thumbs up. She was writing a whole thesis and essays and stuff. So if you like her point of view, you're going to find it really interesting. But that might not be in Citizen Kane or whatever book, whatever movie she's writing the book about. So yeah, to me, I do think people go too far in that part. But I think in this film, one thing I did enjoy was there's a really interesting thing with like dynamics where you sort of flip one person from the active one to the passive one, sort of. So if you think about it, right, the character of Laura Dern is like totally innocent and naive eventually, even compared to MacLachlan. He is then more a little bit edgier and willing to push it out a little bit more. But then when he goes to the Isabella Rossellini, suddenly he's the fucking person who's like the victim, as it were, and she's the one doing all the shit and passing the cycle of abuse to him. But then she herself is subservient to the Frank character. And it's like, actually, like the dynamic plays out very interesting because actually, obviously, some of the like sex and rape scenes, well, essentially, they have someone who's a rape victim immediately rape someone themselves. And then, but then it shows this whole fucked up dynamic of like, again, there's actually a lot. Like, look, I think you can just say a lot about like people as opposed to having to be some like artistic subtext. There's a lot going on there.
It's one of the reasons why this movie is actually, for me, I think it's a very interesting film that will forever be referenced. Fuck all the surreality and the cinematography.
It's a very anthropological film, mate.
Yeah, exactly. There's this,
I was thinking that in those scenes where she's saying like "hit me," etc. Like it's the whole thing of like people who get abused.
You
sometimes
show me,
in some fucked up way become a magnet for that.
You show me another movie that talks about the cycle of abuse in this very brash, deliberate fashion where it's not implied. It's just explicit. It's just text. It's not subtext. You don't really see a lot of films that do this, particularly with women.
Hit me. No, stop it. Hit me. Hit me. Hit me.
And I guess that sort of brings us to the scene that is the meat of the movie, which is the Isabella Rossellini. By the way, she is fantastic in this film.
You want to know detail I didn't know until I just looked it up recently. She is the daughter of Ingrid Bergman.
Yes,
from Casablanca.
Yeah.
Which is mad. And by the way, I actually think in this film she's also really good. She's really sexy.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, but
in a unique way.
Yeah, this is the aspect of it, though, isn't it? We obviously see her, and she's a very Lynchian beauty. He loves the women with the big hair and the red lips, and again, this the Americana ideal. Even though Isabella Rossellini almost has this like whimsical, foreign quality in her accent and everything else. She is a desirable woman. And that's not lost on us. Kyle MacLachlan is an intruder in her world. He breaks into her house. He is spying on her. He sees her in her underwear, and as we'll get to, she finds him in her house, an intruder, and immediately she's like, "What? Who are you? What are you doing?" And we're kind of like, "What the fuck?" She holds him at knife point, makes him strip. And then she's about to perform. She's about to blow him, and he's kind of loving it. He can't touch her, and you're like, wow, this is like really insane that we are watching a woman be empowered to sexually assault a man in this way. If empowered is the right word, I don't know. But it's like very strange to see that in a film. In the 80s, this just would have been. What the fuck?
Think how daring it is to show someone who is themselves a victim of sexual abuse turn around and manifest it onto someone else as a coping mechanism. That's crazy. Yeah, that's shocking as fuck.
It's the order of things. Because of how it happens in sequence, you don't know why she's doing that to him until Frank Booth turns up. And Frank Booth turns up, and then we watch him beat her, rape her, and also as well, this is before porn, right?
Richard, just to see people naked like that is actually shocking. That wasn't in a lot of films back then.
Yeah,
but the joke is this is half a joke, but everyone of my age knows this. That is for real. Why people sometimes did watch art house films on Channel 4 1 in the morning.
Especially foreign exploitation cinema.
Yeah, Monty, if you're like 14, you might see an actual woman's bush on the screen. I know that sounds so boomer, but that would blow your mind if you were 14 watching on the TV. Like, what the fuck?
Yeah, and ultimately, this is before porn. And then all of a sudden, there's this bizarre Oedipal element introduced to it, which is, I mean, a lot of people have written essays about this movie.
Baby wants to fuck or whatever is a line you'll never be able to get out of your head, is it?
Mommy. Oh, Mommy. 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 Mommy loves you. Baby wants to fuck. motherfuckers, fucker! You fucker! Don't you fucking look at me!
You won't. But like, so obviously she is mommy. Frank Booth is daddy. And so a lot of people have kind of interpreted this because Kyle MacLachlan has sex with her and ultimately kills Dennis Hopper. It's a retelling of Oedipus, which I kind of fuck with that. It's pretentious, sure, but I kind of fuck with it. But ultimately,
it's a type story. That's valid.
Yeah, but I genuinely I genuinely forgot how like this. It's a very prolonged, sickening scene. Like once Dennis Hopper turns up, like don't look at me, because the he hits her and it gets more progressively violent. And one of the things I always hated, and it was the same thing that happened with Straw Dogs. A lot of people interpret that smile as she's being punched and hit and everything. He slaps her, he gives her the backhand, not the punch. And then she leans back in the chair while he's like staring at a vagina. And a lot of people interpreted that as like, it's almost like a consent. That's absolutely not what is happening. There's no way that is happening. I mean, she is absolutely a victim in every sense of the word. It's that when broken people experience trauma, you obviously go through it in different ways, and in the moment when you experience something that you can't escape from, there's like that hostage mentality, that Stockholm syndrome that you lapse into, and I think that's what's happening in Peckinpah's Straw Dogs. That's what's happening here, and it's I was genuinely shocked. I'd forgotten. I remembered it being almost like comedic in a way, that like not to say it's funny, but to say that like David Lynch imagines a sexual assault being like this, and the way I remembered it was 5 minutes. Dennis Hopper comes in, baby wants to fuck, huffs some fucking nitrous, blows his beans immediately, and that's it. Like, no, this is a horrifying, prolonged. You're watching this as an adult. It definitely hit different.
Yeah.
And I think this entire scene is the meat of the movie. I think Kyle MacLachlan being stuck in the closet, being like locked into watching this and understanding the horrifying dynamic between this man and this woman that she was about to do to him. And then they do kind of get locked in like some fucked up abusive relationship afterwards.
Well, and I think that that's where we see, what's interesting about this film is you get to see how the abuse transfers onto new people.
Yeah.
But the implication is obviously that Frank Booth himself was the victim of this abuse also, which is why he enters this weird disassociative baby daddy state in these instances.
Well, it's two
right?
characters. He's two people.
Yep.
It's baby and daddy.
Yep.
When he's impaired by drugs, he's baby.
As if to show how effective, because by the way, the most memorable thing about this film was obviously all the David Hopper shit. This just shows you how in my brain it had such an insanely strong impact when I first watched this film. Because what I was actually shocked by is how straight the camera shots are when he does all that shit. In my brain, I was remembering like that scene in the car where he's turning around like, what are you looking at? For me, that would have been like, modern day, like hyper, zoom right in on the face and the eyes are like, no, that's just his performance gave that off the screen. Like, it's actually just shot in a very normal way. Dennis Hopper brings all that to the screen. I don't even know that David Lynch told him to do that. Like, he wows out in this film. He's really good. He's fucking straight. He's he's incredibly terrifying and it's intimidating presence for sure.
What are you looking at? Nothing. Don't you look at me, fuck!
David Lynch has obviously told the anecdote about how like he didn't have Dennis Hopper on his radar when he was like looking for casting.
You would think the whole film was based around him, wouldn't you? You'd think it was like a vehicle for him.
And apparently, like Dennis Hopper, like met him and basically said, like, you don't understand. I am Frank Booth, and like David Lynch does this fantastic.
Because famously, Dennis Hopper was hopped out on a bazillion drugs during this period and has sabotaged his own career.
This is post-apocalypse now, Dennis Hopper, where Dennis Hopper was just on LSD in the jungle. He didn't even have any lines. He was just saying insane shit on camera. Obviously, Easy Riders, the late 60s. So, anyway, but he met with David Lynch and basically said, you don't understand. I am Frank Booth. And he said, well, that's great for my movie, but I don't know if I want to have dinner with you.
That's a great line, by the way. That's a fucking straight fire line.
Yeah, exactly. And by the way, Dennis Hopper is Frank Booth. I mean, there's no getting away from it. There's something about Dennis Hopper's performance in this movie where it is semi-comedic because he's so absurd and so over the top. But I defy anyone to watch the scene we've just been talking about and how Dennis Hopper performs that. Don't look at me, you fuck, and he's repeatedly hitting a... Yeah.
Well, don't you fucking look at me that line comes from this film.
Yeah, but almost certainly. Yeah, don't you look at me! Don't you look at me! But also, dude, the fucking scene where he's got Kyle MacLachlan, we're going on a fucking joyride. And Kyle MacLachlan punches Dennis Hopper in the face. He drags him out of the car, and then he's kissing him. He's kissing him on the lips and spreading the blood all over his face. And he's while playing his favorite song, the candy-colored clown they call the Sandman. And he's saying to him, like, don't you make me write you a love letter, because a love letter from me will kill you. It's a fucking bullet. Do you understand? Like,
which is a ridiculous piece of dialogue, by the way.
but I mean, that's what I'm saying. Only Dennis Hopper could deliver that in a sinister way. Like anyone else, I'm guffawing. But actually, I believe it in that moment. Like, oh, okay. So there's something worse that Frank Booth can do to you than hate you, and that's love you.
Huh? Feel him. Huh? You like that? Hold him tight for me.
By the way, one thing, and this obviously ties into the Isabella Rossellini part, but one thing I thought he also captures in this film that I've never really seen in many films before, you've certainly seen a million scenes of a lounge singer in a bar looking beautiful with a light, usually it's not white light, obviously, and that's usually, by the way, thing like Dark City, that's usually normally just to introduce a female love interest, or like, hey, that's who the detective's going to be with. But when they repeatedly have these scenes where it's like that, like when he goes and has the Ben lunatic sing him a song with that light, like, there's something about that type of singing.
Liberace Dean Stockwell, which we all
something
needed in our
about
life.
that type of singing that is essentially like a siren call that like draws you in, and does, by the way, make you in a way like objectify that person. It's like the effect that I imagine women must have to those like singer-songwriters they fall in love with. You start to like identify the content of the material with the person, and you're not seeing it just as a beautiful song. You're seeing her as this unobtainable object who's incredible, because that one's so bizarre at that party. By the way, that party is some like Twin Peaks levels. That's like some Hellmouth shit, like where like in that last scene. By the way, the most surreal scene in the whole film no one ever even talks about is the one where he goes to the house later and there's just that guy stood there like dying, like bleeding out, like it's smashed in TV. Like that's like some shit out of the fucking Red Room or something. Like that's not even attempted to be explained, but that just happens. That's just the world Frank lives in. That's it.
Yeah. Well, that's the other aspect of this. Like, first of all, just to your point about how in a lot of Lynch's stuff, I actually think there is the way he frames beauty very often involves a woman singing on a stage or performing on a stage in a spotlight.
Heart, right? I think it's in Wild at Heart too.
It's Wild at Heart.
And Mulholland Drive.
Everything. Twin Peaks, Mulholland Drive. It's in all of his stuff. Why? And it's not like a profound statement about talent. It's about like performance. And when you put somebody on a stage in a spotlight, the spotlight essentially, you can see all the imperfections, you can see everything, and they're singing. If they're able to sing, be gorgeous, be earnest, I think that's like essentially what you're saying about it being a siren song. And by the way, that was Isabella Rossellini singing. I mean, that was also another thing that he does. Like, he's very explicit when someone is lip syncing. as we saw with Dean Stockwell. But he is saying, like, you know, how could you not love these women? How could you not love this beautiful woman that essentially can do
there's
all
always
of these
something,
things?
but that's part of Americana, though, is the allure, especially of the jazz singer going back to the 50s and 60s.
Yeah,
there's something that's always been incredibly
it,
erotic about that, right?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. But I mean, look, so the whole movie is just blown to pieces the moment Frank Booth comes into the movie. And so Frank Booth is a very interesting character to me because he is simultaneous, like, there's no criminal, no drug dealer, no violent criminal operates like Frank Booth. Like, they're just not like that if you've ever known them in real life.
No,
they just don't go. Yeah. But like, they don't behave like that. They don't have a can of nitrous on their hip. But Lynch,
it's like a Batman villain, man. That's what it feels like.
Yeah, that's not a bad comparison.
Here's the line. This is actually what Tim Burton probably thought he was doing with Batman. It's just actually the joke is that would be a better villain in Batman than fucking. That is your gothic fucked up weird. Yeah, you didn't get it.
But, and this is also crucial to understand. There is a note of truth in this, in the sense that if you've ever been around these people, if you've ever trafficked in this particular type of company, I certainly have, there is that thing that you do where you just roll from house to house, drinking, doing drugs, you know, making your collections. You do that, and you do meet other fuck-ups like you, and you're fucked up and they're fucked up, and you have this weird relationship. This is like one of the things that, like, it's like, so Dead Man's Shoes is absolutely a touchstone movie for if you grow up in working class Britain and you want to know what the average gangster in a small British town looks like. They're just a collection of fuck-ups and goons and losers, you know, and yet when David Lynch tries to do that, you go, well, no one's like that. No one's huffing nitrous and then going to see a guy called Ben to make their collections, and they make Ben lip sync to their favorite. Well, no, actually, that's closer to the reality than you would probably like to think. If you've never been around that, you wouldn't really understand what Lynch is saying there. And what I love about that is, like, David Lynch has obviously never been in that setting, so he goes, okay, well, it's probably like this. But he has enough of an understanding about what it is to, if you've ever been there, you kind of get what he's going for. And so, I mean, Frank Booth is, like, still a legitimately terrifying psychopath, as ridiculous as he might be.
Regardless of whether you vibe with this movie or not, Frank Booth and Dennis Hopper's performance are, like, must see for film understanding of film history. I mean, it's just, this movie is so iconic in that way, and the lines that come out of this and just the bizarreness of this experience is something that is echoed time and time again. This is just one of those characters and one of those roles that you have to understand much of what comes later on in film history.
Yeah, Frank Booth is ultimately what would happen if you distilled any personality down to purely satisfying desires in and of the moment. If you only satisfied your immediate desires, you would end up like Frank Booth on a long enough time scale. He wants to do a hit of nitrous, he does. He wants to do something violent, he does. There's not really a plan to anything he's doing. There's not really a big design. If he wants a beer. Give me a beer before it goes cold. Give me a beer, you fuck. Put it in a glass. He has one sip. Right, let's go on a joyride. Like, it's just whatever he wants to do in the immediacy, he does.
That beer's gonna get warm. One thing I can't fucking stand is warm beer. It makes me fucking puke.
You want me to pour it?
No, I want you to fuck it. Shit, yes, pour the fucking beer.
And it's like, yeah, that's no way to behave. That's no way to live. There's no way to live your life. Like, it would turn you into something absolutely perverted. Meanwhile, everyone around Frank Booth is merely an extension of what he wants to do. Even his friends, like Ben, played by Dean Stockwell, Ben, he just makes him lip sync his favorite song. Give me that cassette with the candy-colored clown on, because he loves some classic 1950s crooner music because he's in a Lynch movie. Lip sync it, you fuck, right? So he does. That's his friend, and then he doesn't even get through the whole song. Right, we're driving again. It's like, holy shit, bro! Like, take a moment, take a beat. But he doesn't. He satisfies every desire, but never even appreciates it in the aftermath. And that's what I mean about like the whole let's fuck. I'll fuck anything that moves.
Maybe this will tee you up, by the way, Richard. I also thought, remember, this is why you have to keep doing the context. This is from like 1986. This has to be one of the most terrifying examples of drug psychosis I've ever seen. Like the whole thing where their own perception is that you're the one staring at them. Like if anyone who's ever had this, who's been out in the night in the UK in my era would know this, right? You're just a normal person going out for some beers and some drinks, and you accidentally, as you're looking around the bar, just looking around you see someone, and you can if you know later on, you'll instantly know, but at the time you don't know. They're obviously on cocaine. So what happens is when you see them, the reason when you look past that you keep looking is because they're just looking at you like burning a hole through your fucking, because that's how they look at everyone. And then what happens is when you see them, your brain goes, as a natural reaction, goes, why are they looking at, are they looking at me? Their brain's going, that fucking guy's staring at me. Who does he think he is? What do you think he's doing? Like, hey, what do you think you're doing over there? I've had that actually happen to me before, mate. Where it's just like, bro, I was just looking around. Like, you're the one that's perceiving that, but you're projecting it onto me. That, bro, this guy's doing that the whole film, and it's actually terrifying because I've actually had that experience. So that was gripping. I found when he's doing that whole. Why are you looking at? What are you looking at? Even in this film, you're okay. If you'd actually said in where I come from, I'm looking at nothing, like he said. That's actually that would be a burden to get the shit kicked out of you. But so for the kids there.
Never say nothing. Never say nothing. Because then so I'm not gonna bite. I'm not gonna bite.
That gets you a beat down.
Yeah, don't do that. I mean, listen, to that point, obviously have had that experience even at a point where probably that experience shouldn't be happening to you. I used to drink in a boozer in Birmingham. It's closed down now. It's called the Roadhouse. And it was a bike.
The great movie, of course.
Yeah.
Well, I actually low-key love that movie, but
I think it's fire. We definitely need to an arc at one point in time.
It was like Roadhouse Route 66 is what it used to be called, and it was a biker bar over near Cottridge. Just for if anyone wants to fucking check out the history. And I used to live not far from there, within walking distance. I used to go to that bar all the time. I've even got photos of me performing stand-up and poetry recitals in this bar, right? I was like very much
no video, sadly. No video.
No, but I'm wearing a fedora in some of it. So
no, but in some ways, if I could go back in time, boys, I told you again, I'm not going back and doing all the historical shit. I'm just doing petty shit for myself. I'm going back in time. I'm hopping out to MLG Summer Arena 2012. I'm filming Monty interview fucking Dyrus's pillow. Getting Richard Lewis's fucking stand-up tips. I'm getting it all the hidden
by the way, stand-up straight fire, of course. Poetry, not so much.
Listen, my time bandits would be wild. It'd be incredibly self-indulgent. I wouldn't even be with Napoleon at all.
So anyway, I used to drink there all the time, and obviously it was a bike bar ostensibly, but like most biker gangs now are kind of benign. But then there was this one time, and I won't name the gang just in case, but one of the few active criminal biker gangs rolled through, went to that bar, and me being me, I'm just like a talkative dude, and I was like, "Oh, so you're in that gang? Oh, yeah, I was that." And anyway, they ended up thinking I was like some sort of undercover police officer. So I was asking so many questions. So I went for a piss, and I had like 4 bikers basically saying, "We're gonna kill you." One of the bikers from one of the benign gangs is like, "No, he's a regular. Like, why would he even be trying to infiltrate you?" And these guys were all hopped up, and there was no talking them down. I had to get fucking smuggled out, mate. It was mental. It's one of the like, it's one of those things where it's like, just based on conversation, it's probably the closest I've.
Well, the paranoia is one of the core like symptoms, isn't it? That people get really paranoid.
And by the way, Dennis Hopper obviously knows that because Dennis Hopper was a fucking fiend. And so when he inserts him, by the way, is Frank Booth and are they different people? It's Dennis Hopper. I don't even know if Frank Booth isn't just Dennis Hopper in this film. Like I don't even know.
Along those
lines, it's just been method actinism his whole life.
Along those lines, Richard. So I used to, when I lived in New York City, I used to go to this heavy metal bar, right? And this was far away from one of the major biker gangs. Again, we will not name names, but sometimes they would come to this bar, and the rule was the leader of this biker gang, who was an old man by this time, would come, and the rule was you do not talk to him unless he talks to you first. But honestly, if you were just sitting at the bar, some of the fucking shit he would tell you about what happened in New York in the 1970s with this gang was crazy. And the stories I heard at that bar were
compelling. Like, you'd want
absolutely insane.
Yeah, you'd want to talk to him. Obviously.
But you don't. You just sit there and you're just like, I am receiving information. I am not in. Okay. Yeah. Do not comment on it. Do not say anything. Yeah. Do not prompt it.
Yeah, exactly. Like, that's the thing, because it's like he just tells you some insane story. So we massacred all of them. Yep. And then you go, what? No one got arrested, and that's you done. You know, like you're in one of the mass graves on the outskirts of New Jersey. You know. But yeah, but anyway, back to Frank Booth. The Dennis Hopper absolutely is note perfect in that sense. If everything else is a version of hyper reality, the rolling around with a bunch of like subordinate Goonies. By the way, his Goonies that don't even have any lines. Well, they do have lines, but they barely have any lines. Is like Brad Dourif, one of the best actors of all time, in my opinion. Like Jack Nance. Like, these are like fantastic actors relegated to Goonies in Dennis Hopper's company. But they're just like, okay, well, we just do whatever he says.
Also must have been incredibly lucky to get this cast. Like, again, this is a cast that both of them haven't gone on yet to the big film. It's actually crazy how many people you recognize in this film. It's fucking bear in mind, it's like a 1986 film with like indie aspects to it almost.
Yeah, and these people are still active. I mean, Isabella Rossellini was just nominated for an Academy Award for Conclave. For the upcoming Oscars, so you know they're still around and they're still at the forefront.
And obviously,
of their
Laura
careers.
Dern is Admiral Gender Studies in Star Wars.
Yes, that's how I like to remember.
Yeah, just in case you forgot. Dean Stockwell's dead, sadly. But no, I mean, look,
Kyle MacLachlan's in Fallout.
I mean, as good as dead. No, I mean, listen, the reality is I just don't think this movie would have held up without as intense a performance as Dennis Hopper. I mean, like, it's just that simple. Like, Dennis Hopper is the rotten heart of the movie. Like, without him being as over the, you know, just a fucking, every scene he's in, it's just uneasy. It's just a fucking nightmare. And like, we've all, look, whether you can identify with any of this or not will say a lot about the life you've led. But one thing we should all be able to identify with is when you're in a room with someone you don't want to be in a room with, but you cannot leave. That's Frank Booth. That's what he does in every scene. I'm just in here. I'm in the closet, right? Like, not like that, but, you know, well, maybe. Right? I'm in the closet with fucking watching Frank Booth do something awful. I can't get out. I can't leave. That's what they're putting you. That's the situation you're in. And everyone at some point in their life will be in that room. You will be in a room where something is happening that you wish you weren't witnessing, but you are witnessing it. And not only are you witnessing it, you are forced to witness it by this tyranny of politeness, this social propriety, or in a, you know, just an inability to leave in that moment. And that's what Frank Booth does. He's literally holding someone hostage. He holds everyone hostage in his life. He has no friends, only hostages. That's crazy, but very relatable. If you're from, there will be a period in your life, I'm sad to say, where Frank Booth will make total and utter sense.
So yeah,
never thought I would say that.
I'll give you the punchline. The punchline being, I was that person in esports green rooms at times. That's partially a joke and partially an incredibly self-reflective statement I just made.
Yeah, Duncan Booth, we used to call him. Yeah, no, but yeah, no. I mean, like, honestly, like, Dennis Hopper just fucking kills this role, and I know it is. It's not his best. It's not Dennis Hopper's best by any stretch of the imagination. Like, if you look at all of the great movies Dennis Hopper did, but in terms of just being essential to the film.
To me, it's the most iconic, though. I always do think of this role when I think of it.
Yeah. I mean, because it's kind of hard. It's like, there was already this sense by 86 when this movie comes out that Dennis Hopper had already been through the Hollywood system. After Easy Rider, he did that fucking. He was given all that money to do that the last movie in '71, and basically that was a massive flop. And everybody knew he was a fucking cocaine freak, and everybody knew he was a lunatic. It certainly didn't help by, he goes to Apocalypse Now. By the way, that whole thing about how he's even cast in Apocalypse Now is insane. Like, it's like, what is he even doing? And yeah, he's just, not only does he turn up wrecked out of his mind on LSD, he's feeding the already difficult cast LSD, telling this will calm you down. Where you go, get this fucking down. You're like, bro, we've already had problems. Like, I'll never understand to this day why anyone thought Dennis Hopper was the solution to that particular problem. But by the 80s, he is doing Texas. He did that comedy Texas Chainsaw Massacre sequel before this. He was a joke, Fucking Blue Velvet essentially relaunches his career, and it relaunches his career as a villain. He's not the cool stoner guy anymore that he was playing in movies. He's not the throwback to Easy Rider. He is a terrifying presence on your screen. And look, yes, in the aftermath of this, historically, there are some missteps. The Mario Brothers movie where he plays King Koopa, not Bowser, King Koopa. But you don't get a True Romance or a Speed or a fucking Waterworld or Colors. You don't get any of this without this. This saved Dennis
By the way,
Hopper,
if anything, that shows how fucking legit Dennis Hopper is. Because one thing he did is something I have a lot of admiration for, which is I've watched a lot of the careers of the people who got blacklisted, like fucking, what's his name? Mickey Rourke, Robert Downey Jr. They keep making films, by the way. They just have to go and make the most random independent films you've ever seen. But the thing is, they still come like they're actually like a craft actor and give their best. Even in like, there's films Mickey Rourke are in that are like a 6 or a 5 out of 10. But his role's fucking sick. It's like he thinks he's going for the Oscar or something. And I have to say, if even though, as you say, the one note joke is, and he was King Koopa, bro, he actually played it straight, like actually a humanized version of King Koopa in the real world. Bro, he didn't even, it wasn't even trolling like Jim Carrey is fucking like Robotnik or whatever. He actually played it like, I'm going to do, it's just like, I'm going to really bring this character into the world. What would he be like? He's an actor who's just actually legit, yeah. There's no artifice.
I mean, put it this way, if I said to you, right, True Romance, obviously, famously, is the fucking screenplay by Quentin Tarantino that he essentially sold to help fund, his rise as one of the greatest directors of all time. And ultimately, when we were in, because it was like early 90s, like 93, 92, it was after Reservoir Dogs had gone out anyway. We were in Tarantino mania. And so all of his old scripts, like Dust Till Dawn, all this stuff got dredged up. And it ended up being an insane ensemble cast, True Romance. I hope we do that movie at some point, if we can find an excuse to do it. But anyway,
Christian Slater arc, let's go.
Let's fucking go, bro. They ended up casting like Gary Oldman, Brad Pitt, Slater, Hopper, Val Kilmer. Val Kilmer in an uncredited role playing Elvis, right? It is mental, right? And so that movie is low-key a 90s sleeper classic. What does anyone remember about that film?
The famous scene with Dennis Hopper. By the way, on YouTube, that scene is called the best scene ever or something. And I'm not even joking. It might be. It's like, it is just one of the best like jokes and scenes I've ever seen in a film.
And for those who don't know, and I won't spoil it, if you've never seen this scene, it'll make you want to watch the movie. It's a massive spoiler, so maybe just watch the movie. But it's Christopher Walken, who everybody loves, rightly so. Christopher Walken basically has captured Dennis Hopper, and he's trying to torture him to extract information to find out where his son, Christian Slater, is. And so Dennis Hopper tells an insanely racist anecdote about the history of Sicilians and the Moors to ultimately get Christopher Walken to snap, break his cool demeanor, and kill him rather than be tortured. And it works. It is one of the maddest
Like I
scenes.
just said, the video, I've even found the one I saw originally because it's from 15 years ago. It's just titled True Romance, Best Movie Scene of All Time. And then it's the name of the joke. So just, you have to watch it. Even if you don't watch the film, watch that alone. And it is a sleeper movie. It's mega.
So yeah, I mean, oh sorry, phone was ringing off. Who knows who that was? But anyway, yeah, absolute banger. Just one of the fucking, and it's what I mean. Like we would have been denied 90s Hopper if Blue Velvet doesn't happen. Like Frank Booth as a character just totally changes the dynamic. Hold on.
This is the werewolf break.
It's all right. Cut this part out.
Have you guessed who the werewolf is? Is it Monte Cristo? Thorin? Richard Lewis? Made up your mind? Let's see if you're right.
So yeah, ultimately, without 86 Dennis Hopper and Blue Velvet, you don't get 90s Dennis Hopper. You don't get him as a great villain. He wouldn't have been a villain. He might not even have been ever thought of as a villain if he didn't knock fucking this role as Frank Booth out the fucking park, which he absolutely did. It's crazy to think how ultimately Lynch gave him the runway to play with this, and ultimately for me, as great as like, look, I think everyone's doing a great job in this film. I know Kyle, we can talk a little bit about Kyle MacLachlan in a moment. Some people have said Kyle MacLachlan is wooden in this film. I think that's kind of the point. I
He's
think
fine,
everyone,
but he's not the centerpiece of the acting for sure.
he's not meant to be either. Remember, he's a self-insert for the audience. So like, what do you want from him? But like I say, imagine this movie without Dennis Hopper. Like, I don't even know who would have been a contemporary that would have. Let me just quickly check actually. Frank Booth casting before Hopper. Let's just see what comes up. So it would have been Willem Dafoe and Richard Bright. Michael Ironside as well. Maybe Michael Ironside could have sold it, but he would have had to have lost a limb at some point. But like, nah, I can't imagine any of them doing as good a job as Dennis Hopper.
Well, we should probably wrap it up. Final thoughts on Blue Velvet. I know we spent a lot of time talking about Lynch generally, but this is considered, many people consider this his kind of magnum opus. It was not very financially successful at the time of its creation, but it has now grown and grown and grown in legend over the years and critical response and accolades to the point where it's kind of essential viewing for the 80s, one would say. And I think is very compelling. Like, the end of this movie is not particularly interesting, I will say. Like, the raid on Frank Booth, and then coupled with the kind of, I'm not going to say lackluster, but I would say more safe ending, as it were, compared to, like I said before, something like Chinatown. You don't really remember those portions. Those are not the memorable portions of the film. It really is, as you say, the meat is in the middle of the film. And by the time we get to the conclusion, it's rather, I think, rote and straightforward. And
it's got some
not that
very good illusions, though, because it's talking about things that clearly David Lynch had no conceptualization of. It's talking about organized crime. It's talking about police corruption. It's talking about extreme sex and drug use. David Lynch doesn't know about any of these things.
If you compare that to the films we did in our film noir arc, for example, that are very intricate examinations of corruption, police corruption, and organized crime, it's really very different than that. And the film is not, while it is film noir, is way less technical on that front, way less deliberate, way less subtle in many ways.
Yeah.
And so it feels as though that's kind of tacked on to the film when the core is the interplay between the people and the psychology that is taking place rather than the criminal machinations.
Yeah, and I think in that regard, I think, as I say, one of the reasons that I do really still fuck with this movie is that it is ultimately just a very pared down film noir. One of the things that I love about noir in general as a genre is that while it always involves a mystery and lost protagonist trying to figure it all out, I would argue, by the way, probably 50% of David Lynch's films are film noirs. But you're locked into something that you're trying to solve. There's forces you can't understand, femme fatales, everyone's fucking with you. What I like about this is ultimately it's basically just a very simplistic one, which it would be, because remember, even though Kyle MacLachlan is like a 30-year-old man or whatever, he's meant to be a kid. This is another aspect of Lynch. He never casts kids as kids. They're always 30-year-old actors playing kids, and that's just like, again, how he thinks about stuff. And when I say kids, obviously I mean like late teens.
He was 27 when this movie came out.
Yeah, that's what I mean. It's like he's a 27-year-old playing like a 21-year-old. It's like crazy. And by the way, if you know anything about life, the difference between being 21 and 27 is like insane.
Yeah.
It's like insane. The difference in who you are as a person, what your life experiences is like, But by the way, like in the same way that there's a lot of movies that couldn't exist because of this. One of the other like modern film noirs is Brick, if anyone's ever seen that. And I think Brick.
It's actually why, sadly, speaking of gender studies, it's why I thought that Ryan Johnson was going to be a banger, mate.
Yeah,
I remember seeing that, thinking this guy has a lot of fucking talent.
Yeah, but like a film noir set with, obviously set in a very teenage kind of world. You can't make that movie without this. And so, look, I do love this film, and I actually really enjoyed rewatching it, and I thought it held up. And I think ultimately the most important aspect about Blue Velvet isn't necessarily it as a standalone film, but ultimately what it enabled David Lynch to then do, which is ultimately, there's a huge argument online about whether this is like a prequel to Twin Peaks, because so much of the DNA of Blue Velvet is in Twin Peaks. It's small town that revolves around lumber. A horrible thing is happening in the middle of that town. A protagonist that is completely innocent is trying to solve that mystery and get to the heart of it. And there's even scenes that are replicated. At the opening scene where he's throwing the stone at the bottle and trying to hit the bottle, and that's what leads him to find the ear. Obviously, in Twin Peaks, in season 1, he would try and use that. I can't remember what he calls it in the series.
Tibetan. That speech about the Tibetan
where if
mysticism,
he has the right idea, he will hit the stone will fly true and he'll smash the bottle. There's all these allusions to that, and ultimately, Kyle MacLachlan is an insert for innocence and purity and naivete is something that's very at the heart of Twin Peaks.
Except it's done much better. I mean, he's much more interesting in
unequivocally. Dale Cooper is far more interesting in the one's character than this. But one of the things I did just want to say quickly, again, talking about the sexual assault scene, I totally should have said it back then. I'm just getting it in at the end. Is that the interesting part is it's not Isabella Rossellini that steals his innocence. It's Frank Booth. That's what he cries about. He doesn't cry that Isabella Rossellini tried to blow him at fucking knife point, which would be like a horrifying experience for someone that textually it's heavily implied he's a virgin, right? When he sees what Frank Booth does to her afterwards, that's what he cries about. And then when Frank Booth is kissing him, I thought that was like a super interesting dynamic. So I think this. Oh, and also, at the end, when she's naked screaming, he put his disease in me. That's mental, because the disease is innocent. The disease is innocence and an aspiration for a better life.
He put his disease in me.
fuck me. Yeah, there's insane dark elements to this movie. Even though out of sequence, you might take individual scenes and think, oh, that looks like a quirky, funny David Lynch movie, but it's anything but. And as I said, as a foundation for what Lynch went on to do, it's essential. And listen, if you need it as headcanon to be a prequel for Twin Peaks, have at it. But there is no Twin Peaks without this, and no Twin Peaks means no Silent Hill and all the other great art that it led to. So Blue Velvet might not crack the top 100 movies of all time. For me, it's in there. Top 100 is a hell of a compliment, by the way. But it might not crack it. But in terms of being an important must-watch movie, it is that, and I defy anyone to say otherwise.
I would say on this film, I don't even hate this film. It's just one where I actually found the rewatch not as good as I thought it was going to be. In my mind, the three films I really fuck with of David Lynch, well, I don't even count The Elephant Man because that's not actually a very Lynchian film for me. That's kind of quite a straight film too. It's a very good film though, but that's more about the central performances. For me, the three were Wild at Heart, Blue Velvet, and Lost Highway. I told you Lost Highway was my favourite of them. That's actually a very good film. The problem is, I found that, like I say, put it this way, I can just do a filter like this. Any scene where Isabella Rossellini or Dennis Hopper is on screen, then I'm really interested. That's really good. But the other scenes, like I find the scenes of just Kyle MacLachlan and Laura Dern, like fucking hell, are these secretly the parents of like Keanu Reeves? I find these people incredibly boring actors. Like I don't see this depth, these grip. I think Laura Dern is fucking ass.
Deliberately reminiscent of It's a Wonderful Life. You know, where they're walking down the town, the first walk that they take, and he's saying, I knew the guy with the world's biggest tongue and he lived in there and all that stuff. That's like that scene in It's a Wonderful Life, but probably deliberate, I imagine, again, as an homage to Americana.
I found those parts a little bit dragging. Those were sort of like a fucking Hardy Boys mystery or some like shit like that. Oh, golly, what are we going to do next? Oh, check on the corner. Like that just dragged for a bit for me. But the actual parts, like I say, almost like the vignette-esque parts of like what it's like to have someone be in drug psychosis or to be held captive by people or to be taken into a drug den in the underworld. That part's great. Yeah, that part I really enjoyed. So I would probably still give this film, like, I don't know, fucking 6.5 out of 10 or something. It's still worth watching. It's definitely one also, just for Dennis Hopper's performance alone, you must see that iconic performance as part of your film sort of
I'm glad you put a score. I'm glad you put a score there, because just before Monty gives his final thoughts and signs off, we must bring Roger Ebert to the table.
I'm going to go ahead and guess he gives it like 3 out of 4 stars. I bet he loves it. I'm going to guess that.
No,
totally wrong.
Okay,
totally wrong.
Shit.
Roger Ebert hated this film. 1 out of 4. His lowest rating, because he couldn't go to 0.
Yeah, and, doesn't do a 0 stars.
And no, never did that. So ultimately, the lowest rating he could have given it. And what's hilarious is he didn't understand it. So I'm just gonna. All right, here we
Isn't
go.
that expected at this point in time?
Well, listen, I just can't believe America's greatest film critic is such a fucking hack. It blows my mind every time. I sit down and research for these podcasts, and I go, Roger Ebert's good. He's due a win, isn't he? Like, no, he never gets one. So anyway, I'll just read you these 2 paragraphs I highlighted. Right, the sexual material in Blue Velvet is so disturbing, and the performance by Rossellini is so convincing and courageous. And you go, oh, okay, this sounds like you liked it.
Yeah.
That it demands a movie that deserves it. American movies have been using satire for years to take the edge off sex and violence. Occasionally, perhaps sex and violence should be treated with the seriousness they deserve. Given the power of the darker scenes in this movie, we're all the more frustrated that the director is unwilling to follow through to the consequences of his insights. And then he goes, that's what Bernardo Bertolucci delivered when he put Marlon Brando and Maria Schneider through the ordeal of Last Tango in Paris. In Blue Velvet, Rossellini goes the whole distance, but Lynch distances himself from her ordeal with his clever asides and witty little in-jokes.
What?
In a way, his behavior is more sadistic than the Hopper character. What's worse, slapping someone around or standing back and finding the whole thing funny? That's his
review. I mean,
that's his worst review. That's the worst review we've done. That includes The Thing. Like, talk about missing the point. Like, that standoffishness is key to the horror. Crazy. Glad he's dead. Increasingly.
Here we are again.
No, I mean it this time. I was always joking about it, but that's mental. That's like, did you watch the film, bro?
I just think
it's a 2 hour
that
long movie. Like
the sexual violence was treated very horrifically.
yeah.
And also
He thinks David Lynch was good. Hit her again, Dennis. Like, what?
You know,
What?
there are
What are
more
you talking about?
comedic elements to this movie at times, but in a way, those exist to stand in opposition to the horror of the violence, to underscore the horror of the violence.
Yeah. Yeah. And as I said, crucially, and I guess again, this will be a good little runway for you to wrap it up, Christopher, is, you know, the movie, like Hopper, like Booth, it holds you hostage. It holds you hostage. It's going to show you these things. It is going to show you these things.
You can't look away. It's so compelling.
Yeah. Yeah.
No,
exactly.
I agree. I mean, I think this is a great movie. Like I said, I think it falters a little bit at the end, and it doesn't. Not that every film has to subvert your expectations, but I was surprised that there wasn't more substance to the ending of this film. And it felt kind of like, well, we have to get rid of Frank Booth now, so let's have a police raid that is kind of boring. I think, to me, that's the most boring part of the movie, is when it tries to have action.
Two police officers died. It's not even mentioned, not even referenced.
So, I mean, I don't really vibe with the ending. However, I didn't have the problems with the pacing at the beginning of the movie. I found it generally quite interesting, but
yeah,
that's okay. For me, it's probably an 8 out of 10 film. But again, for the same thing that Thorin says, I think you really have to consider this as a must-watch regardless. It's just one of those films you have to know. I
split the difference. This is like a 7 for me. It's not Lynch's best. Like I say, that might very well be for me. You see, this is the problem. Yeah, I absolutely do fuck with Lost Highway. I thought Mulholland Drive in a way was a better distillation of Lost Highway. So I in the point it was trying to make, but ultimately,
I think we're gonna have a spicy conversation about Mulholland Drive, because I also like Mulholland Drive, so I'm looking forward to that one. That's gonna be a
good one. But I will just say this: if you are gonna watch Twin Peaks, if you've never watched Twin Peaks, and David Lynch's death has piqued, no pun, your interest, and you wanna watch it, I'd say watch this first, just to understand what you're getting yourself into. Because it's one thing not to vibe with a movie; it's another thing not to vibe with 3 seasons of television, and kind of be stuck into it. But I will say, this movie's great importance is that it proved what David Lynch wanted to do, whether for good or ill. He could do it and find an audience, and ultimately Blue Velvet is why he's a beloved director.
I just, you know what I can't believe, Richard? I can't believe that people saw this film and thought to themselves, this is the man for a mainstream American television program. That's what's wild. I mean, I'm glad that they did, but the wildest thing is, like, you look at this film and somebody, a network executive in the 80s, said, we got our new show for 1990, David Lynch.
I can tell you, he got nominated. He got nominated as best director for this. Like, I think there was a bunch of nominations. I think Dennis Hopper even got a
being
Golden Globe.
Being a niche artistic director is different than being hired to create a network
Executives
television
don't think that
show.
way. Come on, we must know enough about how the sausage is made at this point in our lives that you just look at, like, oh, this guy got a bunch of accolades, he must be good. And then they come in and he's there with his fucking insane haircut, chain smoking, and his mumbly voice, and they go, that's just an artist's temperament. I'm sure this is going to be fine. I mean, put it this way, there was, obviously we're not going to talk about Twin Peaks on this arc, but, like, there's a reason why the last episode of season 1 of Twin Peaks has 50 cliffhangers. It's because they didn't think they were going to get picked up for a second season. They were trying to force the network into it. Nobody really knew what they had. But the problem for the network was Twin Peaks became so compelling. It essentially is what launches the word Lynchian. That was something only known by the art house student wanker types like me. It put Lynch into the mainstream. PlayStation 2 commercials, like all of this stuff that Lynch is attached to. His fingerprints are all over it. It cannot happen without Blue Velvet. Blue Velvet is basically, for me, you're in or out on David Lynch with this film. You know, terrible slow motion, yeah. Slowed down voices, ha 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 ha, ha. And fucking candles and lights and all this, yeah, terrible. Some of the edits, by the way, in this movie is straight fire. The ear looks like it was cut off with scissors. Scissors going to police tape, like the fucking EKG machine of his dad, beep beep beep, going into the turning of the lights on a police car, like. This guy has unbelievable fucking talent, and yet there is some hackery in amidst that talent. No artist is truly perfect within their craft. But as I said, if you watch Blue Velvet and you like Lynch, you're gonna love the rest of what he does, except Inland Empire. But certainly you are gonna love Twin Peaks. You will be set up for one of the greatest TV experiences of your life. If you don't fuck with this movie, walk away from this arc and come back when we're talking about Robert Eggers, because it only gets more Lynch from this point onwards. So.
All right, I actually didn't mention. I mean, we've mentioned on the show the other films we're doing, but I neglected at the start of this arc to mention which ones we do. They're always in the description, guys. You'll know. But the following films, so we started with Blue Velvet. Wild at Heart is number 2. Lost Highway is number 3, and we will end with Mulholland Drive. So Wild at Heart next week.
It's actually a great arc for Duncan, because it goes film he's okay with, film he really, really likes, his favourite Lynch film, and then he gets to just put out all of the rage about Inland Empire essentially into Mulholland Drive. So I'm actually psyched for this. It's going to be great.
All right. So we'll see you next week for Wild at Heart.